Bree, thank you so much for being on this episode of the Charity Charge Show. I'm the host, Stephen Garten, and it's really a pleasure to have you here. You're the executive director of FAR USA. And tell us a little bit about FAR.
So, FAR, which stands for Fund for Armenian Relief, is an organization that primarily operates in Armenia. So, all of our efforts are dedicated to helping the most vulnerable populations in Armenia. Our focus is empowerment and resiliency, and we cover pretty much every facet of a person's life in Armenia. So we work with children, we work in healthcare, we work in economic development, we do education, we do social services. So we really make sure that we are helping people in a holistic approach, I would
Mhm.
say. The organization was founded in 1988 after a devastating earthquake in Gyumri. So in the beginning, it really was relief, which is what you think of in humanitarian aid. So crisis, food, hygiene packets, blankets, mattresses, that type of thing. But what happened with this organization, with the founders, is they got to Armenia and they saw that there was a lot more work to be done. And they started focusing really on ways to help people thrive. So the idea was okay, survival is an immediate need, thriving, becoming independent is our long term goal. And that's really what we've built off of ever since.
Amazing. What is your personal connection or passion for the organization?
And so I'm half Armenian on my mother's side. My grandparents were genocide survivors. My
Wow.
grandmother, her story was really meaningful to me growing up. And I think, it's something that was always part of my life, but not in a way that a lot of other diaspora communities are very plugged in to their Armenian roots. I wasn't so much. And I think as I got older, my mother passed away in 2014, and it really was something that I wanted to understand more about and connect to. And I found FAR, um, and it was just life changing.
Wow. Tell us too, give us a sense of the scale, kind of the impact and operating budget of FAR USA. So I want the listeners to
Uh,
understand how significant your impact and resources have been and will continue to be.
sure. So there's over 200 employees, people that work for FAR,
Mhm,
and we cover all of Armenia. So Yerevan is the capital, the sort of epicenter city that
mhm.
people a lot of times if you travel to Armenia, you'll go to. It's an amazing place. But we really focus on the regions, and we have been around long enough that we have been able to really help people all the way through. We have incredible teams, incredible capability, millions of dollars are poured into these efforts, and it's really impact driven. So we did something called BCPP, which is on its 13th year now, 12th or 13th, and that took over an entire region, looked at an entire region and said, "What do we need to do to basically change the economic, healthcare, the education, the social service landscape of this entire area?" So it's called Breaking the Cycle of Poverty, and that's literally what it set out to do. It's one of our, to me, most incredible programs because it was long term, huge scale, building infrastructure, education, all of these components, helping people start businesses and almost building from the ground up an entire.
Wow. What are some of the programs or the ways that you're able to help people, build and scale businesses?
So we have our main program. We have two, but they're very similar. Just
Huh?
one focuses primarily on women. The other one is more open, I would say, just across different types of demographics. So one is small business assistance. And what that does is we accept applications, and it's really about meeting people where they are. So, in the sense that we help people figure out what makes sense. And in the regions, a lot of times that's agriculture based because that's what the regions look like. So, we get applications, we work with them to come up with business plans, we give them grants, and we help them start their businesses. And then we see it through. So, we have an incredible team in Armenia, our economic development team that checks in with them, makes sure that they're on track, makes sure the businesses are viable, they make sense, make sure that they're maximizing their resources. And that'll be anything from, honey production, poultry, wine, basic agriculture, anything in that kind of sphere. We do a small business similarly for war veterans, and that's unfortunately, a real population to address in Armenia. And these are people who have been wounded, war veterans who need a way to acquire skills to rebuild their lives. So similarly, we work with them, the business plans, and help them come up with small businesses and put them through training. And then we have a program called She Can, which is a personal favorite of mine, that helps women, a lot of women who have been displaced from Artsakh. There was wars, and Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, which is how it's known, I think, here more commonly. There was a war with Azerbaijan, and Artsakh fell, and over 100,000 refugees in 2023 fled with nothing across the border. So helping those women who have lost their husbands, who've been completely displaced and have absolutely nothing, putting them through training programs and helping them start businesses and helping them to become financially independent, be able to take care of their families, and get back on their feet. They're some of the most incredible, resilient women I've ever met. Really just powerful, powerful people.
That's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing that, and I can see in your smile your passion for it. That's really cool. Can you take us back a little bit? I mean, you'd mentioned about kind of how your family had escaped the genocide. Can you give myself and listeners to this podcast, viewers, a bit of sort of a history lesson, a bit of kind of what's transpired over the past, whatever it might be, 50 or 100 years to kind of lead us to where we are current day?
Sure. So
I don't think we
without
warned you that
getting
we were gonna ask about that, but
political,
yeah,
yeah.
now yeah, no, you can, it's
With,
whatever your opinion is or you're comfortable,
um,
talking about.
yeah. So Armenians were driven out of Turkey and persecuted, and many, many, many people were killed. My grandmother's family was killed, and it was, just a horrible time. It's considered one of the um I know it's I think it's challenging because it's still some places debate it and won't even recognize it. But it was a proper genocide. And, Armenians, I think, throughout history have always been incredibly resilient people. And they
Mhm,
have consistently their existence, their land has been consistently under threat.
mhm,
And even this recent conflict with Azerbaijan has been an issue. And there is a lot of optimism, maybe cautious that things are calm,
mhm,
but it's been a lot of devastation over many, many years. I think for me, on a personal level, not a political level, the way that I grew up, Armenia really represented something in the past. It represented loss. It represented something terrible that happened to my ancestors as far as not Armenia itself, but what happened to people. And that's really what I associated it with. I didn't really think of it as a place that was thriving, that was future oriented, that was growing.
mhm.
And I think that was a big thing with this organization was seeing that not only did it really exist in a way that was surviving and, they were doing so much and there was so much hope there. And so I think for me, yeah, that was probably the most significant thing, understanding the history.
And what's the, kind of vision and place of the ideal place of the future for you and for FAR USA?
Um,
And maybe I'm kind of leading and not being open-minded enough. I mean, as an organization, when you think about your place and the impact of the organization and what you all wanna create, both where you are now, what you've accomplished in the past and going forward, what does that look like?
I think the biggest thing we talk about a lot is the resilience, the sustainability. This idea that there will be peace, that Armenia will be a place where the people can thrive,
Mhm,
that they can grow, that it can be economically strong and stable. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do that. I think, of course, it's, at times an unstable region, but there is
mhm.
so much potential for it. But I think there's been so much development there over, recent years. I think when I the future of it is really that. It's economic stability, it's social stability, it's, just a thriving place. It's a beautiful place.
I wanna go. Yeah, talk to me about what it's like as a tourist visitor perspective. I mean, as part of the organization, do you bring board members or people that are
We
interested in the
do.
organization? Yeah.
We do. We bring board members. We have a junior advisory board now, so younger professionals,
Yes.
and we're just relaunching a young professionals tour. Armenia is incredible. Yerevan is very much a European city. Lots of cafes, so much energy, families, little kids in the street at night. It's very safe. It's incredibly safe, and you can walk everywhere. And there's sort of the main square, and there's music always at night. And like I said, the cafes are overflowing. People are always in the streets. It's a small city, so it's very friendly. People just you meet people, you know people, you run into people. Great restaurants. And there's a great market that's sort of their famous vernissage market to shop at. Yeah, it's just a very cool European city. And then the regions are beautiful, beautiful mountains,
Mhm.
really beautiful mountains, hiking. I love going hiking there. It's incredible. And it's not like you think of here where it's like these very controlled hikes. There, I remember the first time I went, you just head up the mountain and you just go. So it's really beautiful.
That's
There's a
awesome.
lake. Yeah.
Walk me through, Bree. We work with somewhere north of 3,000 organizations, and that's a lot of what this podcast is about. Is how can we bring new ideas, new perspectives, lessons learned from other executive directors of organizations operating, FAR USA with 200 employees and having a presence, in the U.S., but obviously doing this work overseas. What have been some of the challenges in operating an organization at that scale? From your standpoint, especially as you think about in the U.S., 97% of nonprofits are under $2 million in revenue, and they're very much localized in their specific geography, whatever their mission, whatever they're doing. Walk us through sort of a day or week in the life of operating this large organization that has this international mission.
It's a really interesting question and an interesting statistic. I didn't know that, the 97%. So we're fortunate to be operating much higher than that. And I think what so I've been here coming on 3 years. A lot of the people that work for FAR have been here for much longer. And I say that because I think that that is a big part of our ability to run well-oiled
Hmm.
machine. We have a very clear directive when it comes to what we're doing, and even though it is a very large organization, and I know a lot of organizations, it's just kids. So it's, "Okay, this is our focus, it's just kids." We take on every facet of life, right? Like, as I said earlier, healthcare and education and economic development. So we have individual directors that are always on top of what they are overseeing. So our healthcare director is all things healthcare. And what they're doing every day is assessing needs. What's happening? What needs to happen? What are the problems that we need to solve? And that's our approach. So we have these incredible directors in place every day who function as their own almost divisions, basically. And they are experts in their field. They're incredibly knowledgeable and they're living it day in and day out and have been there for a long time. I have a co executive director who oversees operations in Armenia. She's based in Armenia and she's been with the organization for a very long time. And we work closely together. And I think we spend a lot of time. So most of what we do, and sometimes it can get kind of not boring, but sometimes I have a hard time explaining it because we're very programmatic based. So a lot of organizations, it's if it's need based, it's immediate. Our programs are meant to be rolled out and continue in perpetuity. That's our goal. So if we say, okay, we're going to go in and we are going to start a child malnutrition program because we have identified malnutrition as a huge problem in the regions, and we're going to run this program through kindergartens. We're not going to do it for a year. It has to be ongoing. So everything we do, when we roll it out, when we set it up, when we assess it, it's meant to be on and on and on and on. We do have short term projects, we do have shorter term programs, But overall, when we decide to do something, it's long term. So we have to think long term always. That's sort of our main priority. And it can make things more complicated. Sometimes it takes longer because of it, but it's a really important part of our organization's programming and mentality.
Right. So I'd like to get your expertise and opinion going deeper there because part of the gap that I see with a lot of organizations is that, as you used the term, they're so need based that it's every dollar, if it's a local organization that is, um, helping tutor kids after school, right, in Austin, they maybe have a $200,000-$300,000 a year budget, and they oftentimes can have a pretty unsophisticated board as well. No knock, but they just, might not have a ton of the board themselves might not have a ton of nonprofit experience, and they feel like every dollar that they raise should immediately go out, which is not allowing them to create real sustainability and think long term about being there and also how they can grow and diversify their fundraising revenue. So I'm curious from your perspective, like having this more programmatic and long-term approach, how do you kind of work that back towards the funding strategy, maybe cash reserves, things like that, to make sure that
Sure.
that sustainability, financial sustainability and resilience is in place?
So this is a huge part of my job, and it's unbelievably important. And one of the things that I learned from my predecessor, first of all, we don't spend what we don't have. So we will never plan a program without funding. So we don't work backwards where we come up with something and then we say, okay, let's go out and find the funding. We don't do that as a general rule. So we're not going because then you potentially put something in jeopardy. And for us, as I said, if we roll out something like your tutoring example, you do it one year. If you don't raise the same amount of funds the following year, you're going to have to cancel the program or something's going to suffer, right? So we make sure a lot of our funding is private foundations, and we have what we call our reserve fund, like you said, and we build that up. And then we have our specific tied to programming funds. So a lot of these foundations that we work with, the people that we work with, I have very honest conversations. These are long-term commitments. We try to get people to understand exactly what we're doing and have them commit long term. Or if we receive a certain amount of money for a program, we budget and we say, okay, how long do we want this to last based on how much we received? How do we make this work? What's our reserve? Um, and like you said, the long term planning. So you don't spend everything that you get because you can't. One of the things that my organization, and we have an incredible board. And it's my first experience working with a board, but I've heard from other people that I'm lucky in this respect. They're very active. We have some very intelligent financial minds on the board, and they sit on other boards. So I think they have a really good sense of it. We make sure the rule was that if we were never to receive another dollar tomorrow, let's just say horrible, horrible things happen and nobody gives that FAR would be able to sustain itself for at least another 10 years. And we've been just very careful that way because at the end of the day, and this isn't to knock any other organization, and I'm sure other organizations do it, but if you set out to help people, you need to make sure that is always your priority. We are also very, very careful as far as we max out the amount of money we receive going to our beneficiaries. So we're very careful about not wasting money on
Hmm.
other things.
When you think about building up, because I think that what you just described mentioned there would be a novelty or a bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of executive directors running nonprofits. You said a couple things in there that really stood out to me. And one of them is having the funding first, not working backwards, of just having the idea and kind of launching it without thinking about having the funding's already there and the sustainability of it. And also thinking about this 10-year buffer, right? I think that a lot of times especially in small businesses, the counsel might be to just have 3 or 6 months of cash flow, for a rainy day type of thing.
Right.
So a 10-year is amazing. How do you, so now I'm kind of getting to the question, which I think for the organizations that are doing that, how do you think about investing those dollars, or what do you do with it while it's there so that it maybe is potentially working for you?
Sure. So we do invest.
Hmm.
We do have investment funds that make money. When you have endowments, if you receive an endowment, right? So you would build the interest off of it, but never touch the principal. Um, and this is something, this organization has been around since 1988. So they have been very strategic in making sure that if everything fell off a cliff tomorrow, forget that the organization would survive, the people would be taken
Yes.
care of that
Yes.
we've committed to. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing? So I think it's being conservative in a lot of ways. And I can say this, we are not super flush with our marketing spend, let's say, and maybe some of the other things because we really are and have always been maximizing our dollars towards our
Hmm.
beneficiaries and then making sure we're building our reserve. We do multi tiered types of fundraising too. So when I speak about working with foundations or legacy giving, which is when someone, let's say, passes on a donation
Yes.
after they pass away, an endowment that
Which
someone
is a
has
huge
given.
area. I wanna kinda mention, obviously I love this podcast for many, many reasons, including that, I get to sit here and see and learn a lot from different folks, but a guest that I recently had on, told me that if you look at an individual's financial picture, most about only 5% of their net worth is liquid, is cash, right? They've got 401k and they might own a house or have other assets that are, illiquid. And so when you're asking for support and you're only saying donate $50 or $100, whatever, might be there, you're missing out on the full picture of how someone might be able to support you. And the legacy giving is a big one.
Yeah, legacy giving is a really big focus for us. And it's been a great one too, because exactly as you said, people might not have it now, but putting far on their radar. And it's not legally binding just for anyone that is considering legacy giving. If someone commits until the day that they pass away, they can change it. So they might tell you, yes, I intend to do this, or I've put far in my will. You won't know. And sometimes the states can be tricky, but overall, it's a really good pathway for people to be able to
Yep.
give later. Um, and
And
yeah,
their
and what I
services
would,
too. I was gonna tell you, I mean, now this podcast episode is about you, but in the example, it's being able to meet donors where they're at, because he gave an example of an organization that he was working with, and the donor came to them and said, "Hey, we actually have an extra house and we want to donate it." And the nonprofit just said, "We don't take property. Like, what do you like? Write us a check." And so they went to another nonprofit and said, "Hey, we have this." And there are third party intermediaries, if the nonprofit doesn't want to get into that, that will sell the home, collect some sort of commission for the work that they do, and then immediately a check goes right to the organization.
yeah. Yeah, I think what you're raising is a really good point is and it ties back to this idea of strategy is being creative in your funding sources and understanding some are short term, some are long term, some are medium term, some will come right away and not come again. And that's the one when you speak to, if we do a campaign and it's something that's immediate, it's not necessarily going to solve a long term problem. It might do an immediate renovation. It might provide something sort of very tangible, but the longer term commitments are really important. And if you don't have them, then you do have to build up a reserve of, let's say, 5 years before you roll out a program. So you know the 5 years are covered. And if you say, okay, I'm going to we've got this amount of money and now we have enough to do this for 5 years, then you know year one and two, you have to replace it. And then you make
Yes,
that your focus.
sure.
But to just kind of roll it out and say, yeah, we'll get through the next year. A year goes really fast, and especially on a donor when donate, when there's giving, there's sort of these like right before taxes are due. there's these sort of finite periods that giving is a big thing. So I think you just have to be practical, and I think
Mhm.
you have to be strategic to make sure that you have that long-term commitment.
On this topic, I know that you're a part of the Forbes Nonprofit Council. So in November, you published an article titled Engaging Millennials in Gen Z and Philanthropy. Can you talk to us about why you came up with that article and what you've learned along the way and your advice to other executive directors when it comes to engaging millennials and Gen Z?
One thing when I joined FAR was their demographic definitely skewed older.
Mhm.
And that was good, but also not in the sense that there were a lot of donors that were aging out or, life circumstances changed. And we really wanted to start reaching younger people. And as I mentioned, is largely programmatic. So that is not the easiest thing to translate to, fundraising in a way where younger people are used to these sort of very tangible results,
Yes.
especially when our programs go on and on and on forever. And for lack of a better word, they cannot be that exciting all the time. Maybe they're incredible and they do great work, but they're not necessarily sometimes in the way, you want them to be. But I think what we found was that the collaboration, the crowdfunding, this communication with younger people who would find really creative ways to be able to fundraise really made sense for us. And engaging young people in that way, particularly in the partnership arena, has proved really fruitful. And I find with younger people, it is really important to them where their money's going. And transparency is a really big deal. And they ask a lot of questions, and you have to be able to show things that have an impact, that have results. But working with them, I think, takes a village, they say, right? There is something just really powerful in the crowdfunding space that I think for some of our projects within our larger programs can just be incredibly useful.
And when you talk about crowdfunding, do you mind getting into a little bit of the tactical specifics? So you're talking about using digital channels to where you're creating some sort of media and messaging around a specific issue and then trying to use social media channels like that to get in front of or reach um, people that could engage with that.
So if we have a campaign, so we have something we call like donate your day. So you
Hmm.
can donate, if you have a birthday coming up or an anniversary or graduation, you could do something like that where we do the donate your day campaign. So we set up like a leaderboard for you and then you promote it and we give you everything you need to do that. Those are great. But then we also did something with the Armenian student associations in all the universities. And we set up a competition for them because we opened a technological high school called ACT in Armenia this year, and it's a tech-focused school, and they're students, and so we did this pairing of students with students, and they raised money for tuition for students, and we set that up as a competition, so we gave them everything we needed, and then we registered their chapters as they signed up, and we had, like, a competition, friendly competition, and that was really fun, and then we gave them other ways to do they could do obviously spread the word digitally, but then also do car washes, they could have events, raffles, whatever they wanted to do to boost their chapter. So we'll do things like that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of messaging, a lot of communication. I think when you do those, you need to have, in our experience, you need to have a very clear beginning and end. You need to have a very clear goal and a very clear message. And I do think it's something you need to be able to show the results for. I think those work best for something like, let's say, the tuition where you can meet the students and you know who you've helped. Renovating a school would be a good one, or providing computers for a lab. Or we've done them like purchasing buses for transportation, where you can really make sure that all of the dollars are going to this thing. And you can then also, when that crowdfunding, whatever it may be, is over, you can then go back and say, this is what you did. And you can have that accountability. I think that's really important when it comes to those types of initiatives. I think they do really well in that space and less in the kind of open ended sort of thing.
Yes, I think that my analogy has always been we're so consumerism, obviously, is the cornerstone of the economy and we're all consumers. And there's nothing that I buy that I don't know what I'm buying. I mean, there could be some exceptions, but as just a consumer, something that I buy for myself, I see it in a store online. I make the purchase. That product or thing solves some sort of need. I walk out of the store with it or I get it in the mail. There's that feedback loop. It's very like literal that I understand what's happening with my dollars. And I think to your point, there's a huge gap and it's actually to get kind of 1% better. There's some really basic things nonprofits could do to be able to showcase what actually happened with those dollars in terms of, where they're going and what happened, as opposed to just a blanket, perhaps general type of fund. And I love what you're doing there of tying the context of like, in this example, college students that probably recognize that they have so much, but that they can provide someone that doesn't have as much, support or needs help in Armenia, a very parallel example, of what they have, they can give that. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
We touched on this kind of. I wanted to shift to one more article that you did, which was how to be kind when saying no to in kind. And it's kind of funny because um, we had talked a little about some other examples of like the house or whatnot, and I just read a crazy article that I was really shocked and it like really gave me pause, but it was talking about um it's all about clickbait and headlines and stuff, but the headline was something to the effect of like the like terrible side of donations. And it was basically talking about so many people think that they're helping out when they donate clothes to different organizations or the goodwill, but it was talking about the burden that takes and then all the cost of like what actually happens with those clothes. And it was something like only 5% of all clothing that's donated is actually recirculated. And instead, these organizations are basically being turned into like waste centers in a sense. And people think that they're doing good, but it creates a huge burden. And then a lot of these clothing, are then shipped overseas, and then it's like someone else's problem to deal with. So you might be thinking about different things and you're nodding. Let me give you the floor. What inspired you to write that article?
It's funny because I actually wrestled with this one because it's not what people want to hear.
Yes.
But I felt like it was important to talk about because we do get those, and it's different. What you mentioned earlier about the house, like an asset that they're going to sell and potentially benefit from the profit of, is a different type of thing. What we're talking about, like you said, is that clothing dump, right? I get these calls all the time. It's winter. Armenia has very harsh winters. A lot of places in the regions, homes do not have electricity, they do not have heat. So the instinct is, I've got all these coats. I want to do a coat drive. I want to do these things. And the intentions are really, really good. And it's hard to say no because you feel like a couple of things. I think one, you feel like you're being mean, and come off as mean or negative. And then the other one is you don't want to turn off a potential donor. And this is just being, you know,
Sure.
who said, "Oh, well, I tried to give them that and they rejected it. Why would I give them my money?" Right? So it's always this fine line. And I think when you work in nonprofit, you can easily turn into a yes person by default because you want to make people feel good or happy or accommodated. But like you said, particularly with Armenia, and I know with a lot of other places, and I've talked to some other people at other organizations, and they have these same stories where you end up with these donations and you either it is so cost prohibitive to ship that quantity to the place that needs it that it's really not helpful and ends up being a huge expense. Then you have to get through customs. Then you have to figure out a way to make sure it even doesn't get confiscated en route, right? And taken away and you never even see it. And then it really addressing the needs. And what we have found, and I've gotten much better at this, is saying, "Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. But what would really help is the money to be able to purchase the coats in Armenia. So
Yes.
that way we don't have to do the shipping. We don't have to worry about distribution. It doesn't take, if we ship them in November, they might not get there till the spring. So let's, just make sure this is the need." And being able to be really honest about we are both in the same place where you, the donor, want to help. I want to help them, but I know this is the best way. And being able to have that conversation, I've seen it with gifts. People want to give toys. We have a lot of children that we help, and it's completely understandable. But shipping bicycles, is not a reasonable thing to do to make sure that, where if you give money to purchase the bicycles, first of all, we can get a lot more than we could here. So your dollar will go much farther there, and then we can make sure that everything is actually accounted for in their hands, and it can all be overseen in a way that we know we can count on. So it's something that I think the article came out of facing it and some of my personal struggles with it, and really thinking, this is a moment where you can say it and explore it and be honest about it and hopefully educate people, that there is really the intention is amazing, but there is a better way.
I love your perspective on it. And, I would think that people that will, you obviously are trying to look at it from the perspective of what's the best for the people that you're trying to serve, right? And then you work that back to obviously the organization and the finances and the logistics of it. I'm curious your perspective. Obviously, there could be some people that say no or object to kind of your response to them. But my sense is that the authenticity for the people that do then hear what you're saying and choose to make a donation or support you in the ways that are better ultimately for the people you were trying to serve, they're more bought in to your organization. Because I think that for across the world, and from my perspective, I'm 39 now. So, I was around, I was a teenager, but like, I mean, I was affected and saw firsthand the dot-com crash. I graduated college in 2008. So I saw, that, and it created a huge, for my generation, at least, distrust in, banking, finance, big business. And I think that the more and more that organizations can really be vulnerable and transparent, people really respect, and it's showing respect really for the supporters, to not just give them the lip service, but like kind of open up the hood a bit to explain more about how organizations really respond. I'm curious, like, if you concur with that, if you've
I love what
seen.
you're saying. I really love what you're saying. I think it's really important. And I think it's, like I said, for me, it's been a bit of a learning curve because you come in and you just want to make everybody happy. And I think
Sure.
there is a very real, almost weight, responsibility. You want to, these people we're trying to help are dependent on these donors. And so if I do anything to jeopardize that, of course, you feel that responsibility. But I do think you need to be smart about it. And I
Mhm.
do trust, certainly with our organization that has been around for so many years, it has survived so many different things and is still sustained its programs and kept going, that I trust our approach. And I think things like that, I've gotten more and more comfortable, like you said, with being honest, and hope that people, like you said, they don't want to just waste. They want to trust what you're doing. And I'm a big believer in education. I am a big believer in the more you can educate people as to why and how and what, that's where the trust comes from. Even we can talk about marketing, but to me, it's just communication. It's educating people on how we work, what we do, what works, what doesn't, and not being afraid and hoping, like you said, that people appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's more and more a movement too from on the that towards, like when all the things Mackenzie Scott has been doing at scale, billions of dollars with trust-based philanthropy, which is like kind of related to this, obviously comes in a different angle. But I really love the movement, both of what you're talking about, the trust-based philanthropy. I think that it is a really great opportunity for you, your organization, and other executive directors, because you really are, um, in the 1% by doing that. And so much of the messaging that the nonprofit industrial complex puts out, with these national level organizations, is really a misrepresentation of what's actually happening. And, I like to use this podcast platform to share my opinion but also back it up in facts and, my decade plus experience, day in and day out, working with thousands and thousands of nonprofits. But I remember for me, I had two examples that just like blew my mind in the early days. We started Charity Charge. Our initial product, if you want to call it that, was a consumer credit card where your cash back goes to the nonprofit of your choice. So the idea was instead of an individual earning airline miles or bonus points for themselves, every purchase they make, they can find any nonprofit of their choice. And we also had built into our platform a project section for people that were maybe newer to philanthropy, but like more were attached to the cause. So like feeding children or micro loans to female entrepreneurs in developing countries, things like that, planting trees, saving the environment. And one of our partners in it was an organization called Network for Good that acted as the DAF, the donor advised fund, to help kind of do many things, including facilitate, actually getting the dollars that were earned to the nonprofits. And I remember when we were in the early days, I was like, so how quickly, like, I want to have a feedback loop that we're going to build into our technology so that when the dollar's done, like, we can report like the trees that were planted that day. And the guy was like, what? He's like, No, he's like, we're going to get the dollars. He's like, then there's like a 30-day settlement period. Then we need to like, the DAF needs to like write the check. Then they have this many days to deposit it, and it just like blew my world as a millennial because I thought that, all the advertising that I
That's
had
the
gotten
truth.
from, organizations, for example, that would say, hey, $1 plants 11 trees. I felt like it was really happening. And then you see it today too. Like I have to tell my friends not to not contribute, but when you see, natural disasters and you see the American Red Cross is raising money and they're like, this is the impact, they're going to use those dollars for future natural disasters. It's not like that day because you donated $100, someone got a bottle of water. It doesn't, they already have the resources from other things and all of that. But like philanthropy, it's very hard, at least in the movement of money, to impact for it to be very immediate. But that is often how it's messaged to people to motivate them to give now.
Absolutely. And I've seen that also, and I think like you, my mind was blown with some of these other organizations and what happened, and I didn't grow up in a philanthropy career, so I
Hmm.
came into this almost as an outsider and very much as a cautious donor, right?
Hmm.
And wanted to make sure, and it's been really important, and I have been fortunate with this organization. We self-audit every year. We report to all of our donors so you can see exactly what happened. But even things when we are rolling things out, if I say like the students, there has to be the students. You have to know who they are and who you're supporting. And I think for me, it was very instinctive because that was my approach. And I think like there's, and it's from a similar consumer. There have been organizations that I thought were amazing when I was younger growing up. And then you find out, certain things were happening or money wasn't going where you thought it was going. And it made me very cynical, and you see that. I mean, and I think younger people also have a lot more. I said this earlier. They, not that they're so much smarter, but they ask a lot of questions and they have a lot of resources and they are very used to being over marketed. And I kind of like it because it's just accountability and it pushes you to make sure, that if someone asks, you can answer. And I think we've gotten in the habit of answering before we're even asked because we can, you know.
That's great. Well, I really
Yeah,
appreciate you being on this episode of the Charity Charge Show. Bree Carriglio, who is the executive director of FAR USA, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your insights and wisdom and story. Tell us, how can folks that are interested in this find more information, and if they're interested, support FAR?
sure. So our website is farusa.org. That's a great place to go. You can see our stories. You can learn really what we do. Like I said, you can see all the different pillars, we call them, all the different facets of life.
Amazing. Well, thank you for everyone who's listening to the Charity Charge Show. I will sign off by reminding you to charge it forward. Thanks.
Thank you.